CNN Heroes Salutes, hosted by Aaron Burnett, Sunday.
Hello and welcome. I'm Bianca Noblo in London, and this is the Global Brief. Tonight, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky warns how the war ends depends on the world's attention. Then Mr. Zelensky also says that Africa is a hostage of this war, referring to the food crisis. So we'll bring you the reaction from leaders there. And displaced residents in Bangladesh and India wait for aid amid deadly floods. Our chief climate correspondent will join us ahead. The world must remember that Ukraine is fighting for freedom. Those words from President Volodymyr Zelensky as he warns against allowing the war to fade from the headlines and says that its outcome depends on the world's attention. His plea came as Russia seized another town on the outskirts of Severodonetsk, inching closer to its goal of capturing the entire Luhansk region in the Donbass. It's also intensifying attacks on Kharkiv in northeastern Ukraine. Officials say that Russian shelling killed 15 people in that region on Tuesday, including an 8-year-old girl. Ukraine is still vastly outgunned, despite Western arms shipments. It says that it's now received powerful, self-propelled German howitzers, but is pleading for more heavy weaponry. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz says that his country will continue arming Ukraine for as long as needed. Let's go live now to Ukraine. CNN's Ben Wiedemann is joining us from Kramatorsk. Ben, I just mentioned there how the Russians have captured another town near Severodonetsk. Can you bring us up to date on what the fighting situation is there?
Yes, they've managed to seize this town of Toshkivka, and it's extremely important because it's due south of both Lysychansk and Severodonetsk, and it's basically open ground directly to Lysychansk from this town of Toshkivka. And of course, Lysychansk, there are thousands of civilians, many of them old and infirm, in addition to its Ukrainian defenders. And if Lysychansk falls, as the beleaguered Ukrainian defenders and as many as 550 Ukrainian civilians hold up in the Azot chemical complex in that little corner of Severodonetsk, still controlled by the Ukrainians, could very well be completely surrounded by the Russians. So this really is indicative of what has been going on here in the Donbass region now since April. The Russians have been conducting this offensive. It's not a blitzkrieg by any sense or any meaning of the word, but slowly and surely they are using their superiority in air power, in artillery, and in troops to slowly gain more and more ground. The Ukrainians, we were today at one of the batteries of these M777 155 millimeter US made and supplied artillery pieces, but compared to what the Russians have, even this latest Western armaments and technology simply isn't enough to stop this very slow but steady Russian advance. Bianca?
Ben, we've been following the story of the 2 American volunteer fighters who've been detained by Russian-backed separatists closely. Have you learned anything else about where they might be being held, or any more details?
Well, basically, it's the same as we've been reporting for the last couple of days, that they are believed to be in an internment center in the Donetsk People's Republic. That's the pro-Russian breakaway part of Ukraine. They've appeared in various YouTube channels and other media. They appear to be in good physical condition. I can't speak to their mental state, but today we heard Dmitry Peskov, the Kremlin spokesman, saying that in their case, that the Geneva Conventions do not apply to them. The Russians claim these men are essentially mercenaries, not ordinary soldiers, and Peskov did not rule out the death penalty in their case. Bianca?
Ben Wiedemann for us in Kramatorsk. Thank you so much for your reporting. Now, in Russia, those who showed dissent against Moscow calling it special military operation in Ukraine can face arrest, fines and imprisonment. But that isn't scaring everyone. Fred Pleitgen speaks with an elderly St. Petersburg artist who's using her paintings to send a pointed message. A caution, though, his report contains graphic images.
Yelena Osipova might seem a bit frail, but her will is strong and her creativity seems unstoppable. The 76-year-old artist has been detained for several anti-war protests since Russia began what it calls its special military operation in Ukraine. But when we visited her in her apartment in St. Petersburg, she showed no signs of feeling intimidated, instead complaining that police had taken her posters. They took some away and haven't given them back, although they promised to give them back to me, she says. This has been going on for some time. So she keeps painting more posters, like this one, a bird symbolizing Russia with the writing, "Russia is mourning and Russia is not Putin." It's a repentant bird, she says, a bird in mourning, and there are many such people in mourning here. Yelena Osipova is not afraid to speak out about even the most difficult topics, like the massacre in Bucha, where hundreds of dead bodies were found in the Kiev suburb after Russian forces retreated from there in early April. Ukraine and international investigators have launched investigations into possible war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. Moscow continues to reject its forces were responsible. The very large poster shows dead people with huge, piercing, open eyes, and the text says, "The eyes of the dead will remain open until Russia repents." For me, what was important in this poster is this word, repentance, she says. It was important to me to emphasize it. While some Russians took to the streets to protest Vladimir Putin's special military operation during its early days, authorities have now effectively stopped any larger movement from taking hold, dismantling opposition groups and banning many media organizations not in line with the Kremlin's policies. Yelena Osipova says she understands people's fears. They are afraid of losing their jobs, she says, being expelled from college. And there have been such incidents, even if they see a photo on the internet showing someone holding a Ukrainian flag. That is already grounds for sacking. But Yelena Osipova isn't scared, she says. If the authorities keep taking her protest art, she'll paint more, and even a battalion of riot police won't silence her creative mind. Fred Pleitgen, CNN, St. Petersburg, Russia.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky is calling Africa a hostage in the war with Russia. Grain, cooking oil, fuel and fertilizer prices are soaring because of the conflict. But a South African minister tells CNN's David McKenzie that she finds that comment odd. David is in Johannesburg for us.
President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine addressed African leaders saying that Russia is holding their countries hostage because of an ongoing blockade of millions of tons of grain that should be leaving ports like Odessa and going across the world. Now, several nations in Africa and the Middle East and even Central Asia are heavily dependent on grain imports from Ukraine and, in fact, from Russia. The United Nations says almost 25 million tons of grain is stuck, and it could lead in the coming weeks and months to a devastating impact on food security, particularly in the African continent. I spoke to the Foreign Minister of South Africa, who insisted that what is needed is a negotiated settlement between Russia and Ukraine to release the grain.
I found the hostage notion odd in the context of discussions that are trying to find a solution to this. The situation of not having access to wheat is a very problematic one for many countries on the African continent. So we have to find a solution to that, one that both Ukraine and Russia would agree to.
Zelensky was also trying to gain political backing from African nations with his address to the African Union Commission. There has been a bit of ambivalence, it must be said, from several countries on the continent towards wholeheartedly supporting Ukraine and condemning Russia, something, despite the pressure from the EU and the US, it appears that those countries won't change on. David Mackenzie, CNN, Johannesburg.
Russia's war has also prompted a historic shift in European security. Last month, Sweden and Finland set aside decades of neutrality and formally applied to join NATO. But their bids faced immediate backlash from Turkey, which has accused them of housing Kurdish terrorist groups. NATO officials say that they're working to address Turkey's concerns. But some Swedish Kurds are watching those talks unfold with rising concerns of their own. CNN's Nina Dos Santos has this story.
At this Kurdish community centre in Gothenburg, locals are uneasy. They've been dragged into Sweden's NATO negotiations. Of course we're scared, says Nausad Bahir. We're caught in the middle, says Heva Kadoy, and we're not being given a say. Weeks after its application, Sweden's plans to join NATO remain in limbo, thanks to Turkey, which claims that Kurdish separatists operate from these shores. That's something Sweden denies. Yet Ankara is still trying to extradite dozens of people, including members of Sweden's own parliament, most of whom have no links to Turkey at all, like the men in this room, born in Iran and Iraq. Erdogan is saying if you're a Kurd and you want freedom, you're a terrorist, says Karim Rassouli. That's not true. No matter where you come from, if you're a Kurd, you're going to have problems with Turkey, says Bahir.
From the Turkish perspective, they're saying is, look, Sweden, you want to join a military alliance where we are one of the members. We perceive of these groups as national security threats. They make the same demands on other NATO member states, but they don't have the same leverage as they do now that Sweden is waiting to come in.
Sweden is home to an estimated 100,000 Kurds. That's almost 1% of this country's entire population. And there's widespread sympathy for their cause. That means that as Turkey continues to stall Sweden's NATO bid, there's a growing sense of indignation.
Swedes were almost split on NATO accession before the country decided to sign up, and among Kurds there are differing views too.
Salam alaikum.
At this anti-NATO protest, Fauzi Baban, an Iraqi Kurd, says that he's against NATO membership.
Mitt land, Iraq.
Look at what NATO members did in my country, he said. They completely destroyed it. I'm strongly affected by this, he says, since I've come here as a prisoner of war.
Here is my working room.
Turks fighting for Kurdish rights in Sweden are also stoking Ankara's ire.
This is my Kurdish award. They gave me when I was in the prison.
74-year-old Turkish-born Nobel Peace Prize nominee Recep Zarakolu is now a Swedish citizen, but he's fighting off extradition to Turkey for his writing in defence of minorities there.
I feel harassed. I'm a Swedish citizen. And how can the Swedish government can make a bargaining issue? I can't find the words to define this strangeness, this absurdity.
Sweden decided to join NATO to make its population safer after Russia invaded Ukraine. But for a part of its people, the process of accession is making them feel anything but secure. Nina Dos Santos, CNN, Gothenburg, Sweden.
A Russian Nobel Peace Prize laureate is using the honour to help Ukrainian refugees while setting an astonishing world record. Journalist Dmitry Muratov has just auctioned his prize medal for more than $103 million. That's more than 20 times what any Nobel medal has sold for before. This money will go to UNICEF's Child Refugee Fund to help the 7.5 million Ukrainian children affected by the war. Muratov is the editor-in-chief of Novaya Gazeta, one of Russia's last remaining independent newspapers, but facing potential prosecution under Russia's new reporting crackdown. The paper has suspended operations until the war ends. Let's take a look at the other key stories making international impact today. French Prime Minister Elisabeth Borne has submitted her resignation to President Macron. It's customary after a legislative election. But Mr. Macron refused to accept it so that the government can, quote, stay on task. Their camp lost an absolute majority in Parliament on Sunday, and Borne held a cabinet meeting Tuesday to discuss new alliances. South Korea's space program has entered a new era. The country successfully put satellites into orbit after launching its first domestically built rocket called Nuri. It makes South Korea the 7th country to develop a launch vehicle that can carry a 1-ton satellite. It plans at least 4 more Nuri rocket launches by 2027. And British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has condemned the widespread rail strike crippling the United Kingdom. He called the walkout wrong and unnecessary and said that it's interfering with health appointments and school exams. The Labour strike over pay and working conditions is the UK's biggest rail strike in many decades. CNN's Scott McLean has more for you from London.
Well, the UK has returned to relative normality for a long time now, but this week it is feeling a lot like a day at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. Just a trickle of people coming through London Bridge Station, one of the busiest stations in the entire United Kingdom. Most of the platforms closed off because only 20% or so of trains across all of England, Scotland, and Wales are actually running because of the biggest rail strike in the UK in the last 30 years. We've been talking to people here, and many who have managed to make it to central London say they're finding it difficult, sometimes impossible, to make it to their final destinations elsewhere in the city, because this is also impacting the London Underground, the tube system, in a city where most people don't actually have a car. What I found striking, though, is that most people have a lot of sympathy for these striking workers. The question, though, is how long will that sympathy last?
Everybody has their own issues with pay, but, you know, it's not going to help if nobody can't work, you know. So, because they are saying everything is increasing, but we just have to go to work as well, because if you don't work, you don't get paid.
It's very inconsiderate. I support like the action and stuff like that, but it's like come at the cost of everyday people.
Do you think that you'll make it at all today?
I hope so. I have patients waiting. I can't say no.
Further strike action is set to take place Thursday and Saturday of this week. The unions are hinting that this could go on potentially for months. The British Prime Minister Boris Johnson calls the strike wrong and unnecessary, especially since the government bailed out the rail industry, making sure that no workers lost their job during the pandemic. The unions see things differently. They say because of the pandemic, they've had 2 years of pay freezes. Now they just want their wages to keep up with inflation. The difficulty is that inflation in this country is now 7% and forecast to get even worse before it starts to get better. The government's concern is that a large pay rise like that would actually make inflation even worse. Scott McLean, CNN, London.
Coming up next, extreme weather and other natural disasters are affecting millions across the world. We'll debrief the links to climate change. Coming up next.
My name's Pippa Bailey. I work for Ipsos and I'm head of our climate change and sustainability practice. So many companies that we speak to struggle with, how to talk about sustainability, how to share the great campaigns that they're doing. And there's kind of a number of guidelines people need to follow. First of all, making sure you've got your own house in order, that your own environment, social and governance policies are heading in the right direction before you then go kind of on the offensive with a campaign where you want to illustrate what great work you're doing. But also to kind of avoid greenwashing is making sure that that really fits under the brand banner, that it represents what your brand is about, so that it feels very intuitive for consumers, for citizens.
Being a diver, there's so much they can do to protect the ocean and save the ocean. If you look at the ocean out there, okay, there's some net that's drifting in the water. Could be much bigger than the size of any boat out there, okay? So imagine a net being drifting. Okay, it can drift from days, months, years, until they get removed.
It's no longer catching fish for people, but sadly, it is still catching fish and very often wildlife, like turtles and dolphins and seabirds. A couple of times I almost got killed being tangled. Got it! Got it!
No, I'm holding it. I'm holding it. It's heavy. Age is only a figure, okay? There's so much we can do, no matter how old you are.
On Mission Ahead, a new spin on launching spacecraft into orbit.
As a species, I think we just always look up and we say, well, that's the next frontier.
Then, could this new zero-emission boat be the Tesla of the sea? Plus, preparing for the future, are cities that float the answer?
On water, buildings don't have to be static.
Meet the entrepreneurs and inventors who are taking mobility to the next level.
Mission Ahead, Saturday on CNN, in association with Fujifilm.
We have lost our home after it was swept away by the floodwater. All our belongings are gone too.
That woman is one of 4 million people who are stranded now after catastrophic flooding in Bangladesh. The floods, which hit the Sylhet region in the east, are the worst in more than a century. At least 32 people have been killed. Stranded residents are waiting for aid from authorities, including drinking water and medical supplies. And in India's northeastern state of Assam, hundreds of rescue and relief teams have been deployed to help with the severe flooding. Landslides, flash floods and lightning strikes have displaced more than 200,000 people there. CNN's Vedika Sud is in New Delhi with more on the dire situation that we're seeing in both of these countries.
Heavy rainfall and flooding have had a devastating impact on the lives of millions of people in Bangladesh and India. Huge settlements have been engulfed by floods. Villages in northeastern parts of Bangladesh, especially in a district called Sylhet, remain submerged. While tens of thousands have been taken to safer ground by rescue teams, many remain homeless and stranded. There's water all around, but very little to consume. This young boy in Sylhet can barely keep his head above flood water. Holding a metal jar in his hand, he's in search of potable water, as are these women riding on boats. There's been a huge shortage of drinking water in this district. Bangladeshi Air Force choppers have been deployed in hard-hit areas like Sylhet. They've been airdropping food and water packets to those cut off by the floods. In news from India, 11 deaths have been reported Monday in India's northeastern state of Assam. More than 1,400 makeshift camps have been set up, home to more than 230,000 people displaced by the ruinous floods. Rescue teams have been working round the clock. In this image, a young boy sitting inside a bucket was steered to safety by a rescue worker. People young and old are being evacuated to higher ground from their homes in low-lying areas. One of India's leading environmentalists, Sunita Narayan, says climate change is causing extreme weather events in the region.
So it is very clear that with climate change, this region is going to see extreme rainfall. And already in Bangladesh and in the Northeast, you are seeing that impact. That the region has gone from water scarcity to flood in one go. And that is the impact. Devastating flood is clearly linked to the changes that we are seeing in the world.
Bangladesh's Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina carried out an aerial survey of the flood-affected areas Tuesday. According to Bangladesh's national news agency, Hasina has promised to rehabilitate every person impacted by the floods. Vedika Sud, CNN, New Delhi.
Climate change is fueling dangerous weather across the world. For a wider look into the natural disasters that have recently hit our planet and affected millions of people, I'm joined by CNN Chief Climate Correspondent Bill Weir in New York. Bill, always great to talk to you. Can you explain to our viewers how climate change affects these kinds of natural disasters that we're seeing in India and Bangladesh, and also if governments are starting to do anything to try and protect people from them?
Well, it varies by country. This, again, is an example, as we saw the heart-wrenching scenes there from India and Bangladesh, that those who contributed least to the problem per capita will suffer the greatest pain as a result of a hotter planet. And just basic physics is a hotter planet means the atmosphere holds more moisture in some places and then not enough in others. So drier places become drier, wetter places become much, much wetter. This region in northeast India is one of the wettest places in the world. But now it's 43% above records there. So we're talking about 9 feet almost of rain in 3 days, 3 meters of rain in 3 days. No amount of infrastructure anywhere, even in the Western world, could handle that. I saw one quote, and it was like right out of the rhyme of the Ancient Mariner. Water, water everywhere, but not a drop to drink. It's the sanitary conditions that come from this kind of devastation that make a long tail disaster. And this is on the heels, Bianca, of horrible floods just in May. And so it's one after the other. And they're not, of course, unused to flooding in the Brahmaputra River in that area there. Monsoons are sort of a finely tuned natural system. Where if you get too much too soon, it washes your soil away. Not enough, it could not mean to crop failure and eventual famine at that end. But this is going to really wreak havoc on so many lives right now. And you don't know what places, you know, what kind of equipment these governments have to employ. We saw them throwing food out of helicopters. In some places, that will be the most help they get.
Bill Weir, it's always great to talk to you about this, such a worthy expert and champion about climate change issues. Thank you. And scientists in the French Alps are analysing the links between so-called snowblood and climate change. While the term snowblood might sound like something you'd read in a horror novel, the phenomenon is produced by green algae, which have colonised snowy mountain habitats. The algae are naturally green, but they accumulate red pigment to protect themselves from the sun. Scientists at the CEA Centre in Grenoble are working against time to understand why the phenomenon is now spreading so quickly as temperatures are rising and the snow is melting.
So it's likely linked to global warming, and the warmer it is, the more algae there are, and the more the snow melts quickly. So it's a bit of a vicious cycle, and we are trying to understand all the mechanisms to understand this circle so we can try to do something about it.
Well, thank you for watching. That was The Global Brief. World Sport is up for you next. See you soon.
Business is all about making connections. But some connections are easier to make than others. With a CNN partner hotel, the world is always at your fingertips.
CNN Partner Hotels. Connected to your world.
Sunday on CNN. In a year full of challenges, let's salute those using their platforms for good.
It's just so needed, and we have a lot more to do.
Join us as we shine a light on some familiar faces.
I have gotten a front row seat to what heroism is.
Turning words into action.
It makes us human.
If we still care, there is hope. CNN Heroes Salutes, hosted by Aaron Burnett. Sunday.
This is CNN. More people get their news from CNN than any other news source.
Yet another golf superstar jumped ship for the LIV Golf Series. Can the PGA Tour stay afloat? The Lightning strike back on home ice to take Game 3 of the Stanley Cup Final. And Serena finally makes her return to the court. Welcome to World Sport. I'm Andy Scholes at CNN Center in Atlanta. Well, you can now add Brooks Koepka to the list of high-profile players that have decided to leave the PGA Tour for the LIV Golf Series. According to multiple reports, Koepka will be joining the series when it tees off a week from Thursday for its first U.S. event in Portland, Oregon. Koepka, a four-time major winner and former world #1, joins Patrick Reed, Bryson DeChambeau, and Abraham Ancer to sign up ahead of LIV's second tournament. Now, the new Saudi-backed series, reduced schedule and massive sign-up and prize money, proving more attractive than some predicted. Back at the Honda Classic in February of 2020, Koepka had said, "Money doesn't matter. I just want to play against the best. If somebody gave me $200 million tomorrow, it's not going to change my life." Well, a different story, though, I guess, when someone actually puts $100 million in front of you. And on top of the money, Koepka's younger brother Chase, who has never won a high-level tournament, signed up to play the LIV Series. Koepka joining his brother has likely been in motion for a while, and is probably why Koepka wanted no part of discussing the series ahead of the U.S. Open last week.
Understand, I'm trying to focus on the U.S. Open, man. Like, I legitimately don't get it. I'm tired of the conversations. I'm tired of all this stuff. Y'all, like I said, y'all are throwing a black cloud on the U.S. Open. I think that sucks. I actually do feel bad for him for once. Because it's a situation.
Yeah, and here's a list of notable players who have now left the PGA Tour to play the LIV Golf Series. With Koepka and Ancer, LIV now has 8 of the top 50 players in the world. And that does not even count Phil Mickelson or Sergio Garcia. Now, one player who will not be joining the LIV Series, despite rumors, is two-time major winner Collin Morikawa. He tweeted earlier on Tuesday to state for the record, once again, "You all are absolutely wrong. I've said it since February at Riviera that I'm here to stay on the PGA Tour, and nothing has changed. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got some cereal to pour in my milk." And Morikawa trying to be funny, but for the record, pouring your milk in a bowl first is definitely not the correct way to make cereal. Cereal goes first, and it's not debatable. All right, we'll of course wait to see if Koepka and Ancer are the last to make the jump before next week. And for more on who may still be leaving and on Koepka making the move, World Sports' Alex Thomas, he caught up with Golf Digest Dan Rappaport.
Despite what Brooks said last year, I mean, if we're going to go off what guys said in the past, then we're going to think that no one will go, right? Because in February, you had Dustin Johnson pledge loyalty to the PGA Tour. You had Brooks Koepka. You had Bryson DeChambeau. So I'm not putting a lot of weight into what these guys say. But if you look at Brooks, he's always said that the majors are the only thing that really matters to him. He kind of goes through the motions in PGA Tour events. I think what caught my eye with Brooks was they gave his brother Chase a deal. Chase has been struggling, hasn't had any status on the PGA Tour ever, and he gets a deal to go join LIV Golf. And that was sort of a classic, hey, we'll give your brother a deal. That'll sweeten the pot to get you over here as well. So Brooks is not a surprise, but he's still a big name. I mean, the guy's won 4 majors. He's 32 years old. He's not past his prime. So this is a significant get for LIV for sure.
And it seems to be like a certain character of the players that have moved over. Patrick Reed, DeChambeau, Koepka, as you say, you know, not young players, but big name players that create headlines really because of their prickly nature and controversial nature.
They're not the most popular players on the PGA Tour. I'll tell you that much. You're right. I mean, it's sort of slowly becoming almost like a villains tour, right? I mean, these are not. This is not Jordan Spieth. This is not Justin Thomas. This is not Colin Morikawa, who I was just talking to a minute ago and said he was just dumbfounded by all the rumors about him, just purely false. But yeah, we're seeing consistent, guys who have trouble or some sort of gripe with the PGA Tour, guys who have been in headlines, not necessarily for their play, but for the way they've acted. So yeah, there hasn't been that one huge name yet that is like, wow, this is a guy who is young, who's at the top of his game, who's really popular, who's well liked, and is going. That hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, reports that there are other players to be announced in the days ahead, not just Koepka. As you said, Dan, you spoke to Morikawa's agent, who confirms that was BS, and Morikawa himself was tweeted out in a very funny way earlier that just confirming it's not true. But listen, where does this all leave that's the Morikawa tweet that our viewers can see on the screen now. Where does it leave PGA Tour Commissioner Jay Monahan? Speaking to the players earlier on Tuesday, he's going to address the media on Wednesday. The pressure is just building and building, isn't it?
The pressure is definitely building. There's a policy board meeting this afternoon, which is, I think there are 4 players on the PGA Tour policy board, and then the commissioner, some other executives, and then some other executives from businesses that are not the PGA Tour. I would expect to see some sort of news as far as the DP World Tour, whether that's a merger, whether that's, kind of ingratiating the 2 tours further. I feel like that should be the PGA Tour's next move in order to fend off this challenger, to even lean into that. They have that strategic alliance with what used to be the European Tour and the PGA Tour, but it hasn't really done much for the European Tour yet. Their players haven't gotten much more money. They haven't gotten much more access to PGA Tour events. So I wouldn't be surprised if that's the main topic of conversation at this policy board meeting today, is what do we want to do about the DP World Tour? Do we want to fully integrate? Do we want to merge the 2? That would seem to be the next domino that will fall. But yes, I mean, Monahan will have to answer a lot of questions tomorrow about the future of his tour, the future of his business, why some of these changes took this long. I'm just reporting a story now that the PGA Tour is going to have 8 events starting in 2023 that are only 50 players and have $20 million purses. That sounds a lot to me like live golf events. A lot of these changes and the PIP program that started last year that pays some of the bigger names for things that aren't directly tied to their performance, these things happened really quickly after the live threat, which is, I'm sure players are noticing that, like, oh, now that there's competition, you found this extra money for us. So yeah, I'm sure Monahan will be ready to go tomorrow, and it will be probably a contentious press conference.
But they can't take on live head-to-head just in terms of money, can they? Listen, Mickelson, DJ, Bryson, Reed, now Koepka. How many other truly top-name players would have to defect for this to become an out-and-out catastrophe for the PGA Tour?
Again, I think it's less about who defects or the number of defections and more about who defects. I think if someone like Colin, if someone like Justin Thomas, if someone like Jordan Spieth, if someone like Matt Fitzpatrick, who's another one who's been in rumors and I just spoke to and said, I don't even know where these things are coming from. If some of those young guys who have goodwill start to make the jump, then the PGA Tour has some big problems on their hands. But look, I don't think they want anyone to leave. It's not like they're happy that Patrick Reed left. It's not like they're happy that Bryson left or Brooks Koepka left. It's just not super surprising and maybe not catastrophic in the way that one of those others would go. So it's a crazy time in our sports. I feel like we're in it feels like there's like alliances and misinformation. It's like a soap opera. I didn't expect my golf reporting to ever be this dramatic, but here we are.
Yeah, thanks to Alex and Dan for breaking that all down. And again, PGA Tour Commissioner Jay Monahan speaking with the media Wednesday afternoon. We will wait and see what kind of news he has for golf fans about the future of the tour. All right, there is a saying in sports: if you want to be the champ, you got to beat the champ. In the Stanley Cup final, the Tampa Bay Lightning aren't going down without a fight.
Through investment in STEM schools, Egypt has committed to building a more diverse and inclusive workforce. They are encouraging women and girls across the country to pursue careers in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. By ensuring that they are not just represented, but are also empowered to thrive across all sectors, Egypt has demonstrated their commitment to investing in the country's youth and in the mission to achieve sustainable development goals.
No holds
front tonight, hypocrite in chief.
No nonsense.
How stupid do you think we are?
Because getting to the truth matters. Aaron Burnett out front, Tuesday to Saturday on CNN.
Afghan women are afraid that this is the beginning of your efforts to erase them from the workspace.
Malumness, it's not clear. Even if we appear with the burqa, maybe they will say that women's voices are forbidden.
Did you ever imagine that you would be prevented from going to school?
Girls' education is fundamental to the dignity of Afghan life.
Do you believe that young girls will be allowed to go to school here in Afghanistan?
What in the world is going on in Texas right now?
A ruby red state gets redder.
Money is what's pushing Texas to the far right.
Why?
Is this about being conservative or is it about control?
CNN investigates deep in the pockets of Texas. Saturday on CNN.
Welcome back to World Sport. Well, after missing nearly a full year, Serena Williams making her return to the court Tuesday as she ramps up for Wimbledon next week. Serena playing with Tunisia's Ons Jabeur in a doubles match at the Eastbourne International in England. The pair won the match in a deciding set tiebreak. Serena using this as a tune-up for her return. The 40-year-old hasn't played since suffering a leg injury in the first round at Wimbledon last year. Serena still looking for her 24th Grand Slam title, which would move her into a tie with Margaret Court for the most all time. All right, switching gears to the Stanley Cup final. The Tampa Bay Lightning's dream of the first three-peat in 40 years was on thin ice after losing games 1 and 2 to the Avalanche, and things were not looking really good early in Game 3. Colorado getting on the board first with a power play goal. The Tampa crowd getting a little nervous at that point, but the Lightning would quickly put them at ease. Anthony Cirelli evened the score 5 minutes later. Then Tampa would pour it on. They scored another in the first and then 4 more goals in the second period. The Lightning would win Game 3 easily, 6-2. They will now look to even the series on Wednesday night in Tampa, where they have now won a franchise record 8 straight playoff games.
It's not a true elimination game, but this group was in this position last round and coming home, and we knew that this is pretty much a must-win game for us. So I thought we played like it tonight. Our attention to detail was a lot better, and the game plan, not that it changed too much, but we executed it. So, way better effort for our group, and we knew coming home in front of our fans it was going to be a little different, and certainly was.
All right, we're heading over to Japan next to tell you about the special sporting link the country has with Tonga and how it has helped support a nation devastated by a shock volcanic eruption.
隅田北斎美術館では当館所蔵の富岳36景神奈川沖浪浦を富士フイルムの協力で高解像度デジタル撮影を行っています。
高画素かつ高精細で撮れることによってさまざまな楽しみ方がさらに広がるかなというふうに思ってます。それがですね、国を越えたり地域を越えたりすることでその資料価値っていうのがさらに上がっていくかなというふうに考えてます。
Sodexo was created more than 50 years ago by my father, Pierre Bellon, and it's a global catering company and services company all over the world. We have fans in stadium, we have visitors in a museum, we have guests in the conference centers, and Sodexo Life is there to make memorable experiences to all these people. I think it's very important to work with people. We have to work in team spirit. This is very important to engage them. Team spirit, team of progress. I think it's very, very spirit of progress is very important. We have to every day do better than the day before. This is important, and also spirit of growth. This is important too.
We're here at the home of one of the FSB team. Was it your team that poisoned Navalny?
What do you want the world to know?
People are so exhausted. Just going to help her carry this bag.
Scores of Taliban fighters, and just behind us, the U.S. Embassy. I'm the one who has to look them in the eye. Can I have your word? These people are depending on you.
Now they're pressing in. They want desperately to tell their stories.
Welcome back. Well, less than 48 hours after FINA announced a controversial new policy restricting transgender athletes in swimming, Rugby League has declared a complete ban at their elite level. The International Rugby League says trans women, people born male but identifying as female, won't be allowed to compete until a formal inclusion policy has been finalized. In a statement, the IRL said it will continue to work towards developing a set of criteria based on best possible evidence which fairly balance the individual's right to play with the safety of all participants. And the IRL says it aims to have rules in place next year. There are not currently any trans women playing for either of the top two countries playing Australia and New Zealand, but the interim ban has added to the debate sparked by FINA's decision to exclude trans women swimmers who have gone through male puberty. All right, at its best, sport can be a unifying force for good, bringing us together over a common cause. And that's exactly what has been happening in Japan. A charity rugby match raising money to help Tonga try to rebuild after the devastation caused by a volcanic eruption earlier this year. And it was only possible because of the links between the two nations forged through rugby. CNN's Blake Essig reports.
Size, strength, and explosive power. These Tongan athletes are seemingly built for rugby. But here in Japan, where speed, quickness, and agility reign supreme, the inclusion of Tongans has changed the way rugby is played.
Style of rugby doesn't really mean that much, but the important thing for us and for rugby is that they actually bring their culture into our team.
It all began about a half-century ago, a relationship between the Kingdom of Tonga and Japan that started with the curiosity over this, the Japanese abacus, but has since flourished because of rugby.
56-year-old William Sinali Latu was one of the first Tongans to make the journey to Japan. The purpose of that trip? To learn the abacus and bring those skills back to teach his countrymen. But as he tells it, things didn't exactly go as planned.
It was difficult for me to handle the abacus because of my big hands.
To the disappointment of the late king who sent him here, Latu says he never returned. Instead, he spent the last 40-plus years living, working, and yes, playing rugby in Japan. So well, in fact, that he went on to represent his adopted nation in 3 World Cups.
Back in Tonga, I represented Tonga's national team. I assumed I wouldn't represent Japan, but when I was selected, I thought it was a great opportunity, but also a big responsibility.
Although it wasn't always easy, Latu's success helped create a pathway for others, one that hundreds of Tongans like Sione Mao have followed.
I came to Japan thanks to people like Mr. Latu. I saw them working really hard, and it made me think I had to work hard. I could study and do rugby here and pass on what I've learned to younger Tongans.
These days, Latu roams the sidelines instead of the pitch. And the reason he's out here with this group of men is because of what happened on January 15th, 2022.
Nothing like that ever happened before. I couldn't reach my friends and family for about a week. I had a horrible sinking feeling that maybe Tonga had ceased to exist.
This is the reason for that sinking feeling. Satellite images captured the moment a volcano erupted about 60 kilometers off the coast of Tonga. NASA scientists say the eruption generated a blast that was hundreds of times more powerful than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima.
I was in contact with my family before the tsunami hit. An hour or 2 hours later, I saw the video of the tsunami hitting Tonga, and I was at a loss. I was very worried and called my family, but I couldn't get through as all telephone networks were down.
In the end, the Tongan embassy in Japan says 4 people died. 80% of the population was impacted, and the eruption caused more than $90 million worth of damage.
The eruption is spreading dust everywhere, making the water undrinkable. The condition in Tonga is better now, but there are still many people in trouble.
And it's for that reason that this match between the Emerging Blossoms and the Tonga Samurai 15 was played. An event to help raise money for a country still struggling to recover, showing how decades of diplomacy through sport can set the groundwork to be brave for Tonga through aid and action in the face of unimaginable devastation.
Tongans are resilient. I think people have faith they'll pull through and overcome the volcano disaster.
While the Emerging Blossoms from Japan won the match, there's no question that the friendly islands in the South Pacific are the real winners. As a result of this charity match and other fundraising efforts, Japanese Rugby expects to raise tens of millions of Japanese yen, hundreds of thousands of US dollars, and counting for the Tonga tsunami relief effort. A donation that Tongans here tell me will go a long way towards helping friends, family, and a nation rebuild. Blake Essex, CNN, Tokyo.
Thanks to Blake for that report. Coming up, we'll show you the group of athletes using the Greek islands for more than just sun, sea, and sand.
On Mission Ahead, a new spin on launching spacecraft into orbit.
As a species, I think we just always look up and we say, well, that's the next frontier.
Then, could this new zero-emission boat be the Tesla of the sea? Plus, preparing for the future, are cities that float the answer?
On water, buildings don't have to be static.
Meet the entrepreneurs and inventors who are taking mobility to the next level.
Mission Ahead, Saturday on CNN, in association with Fujifilm.
Welcome back. Well, we now head to the Greek islands, not for sun, sea, and sand, but for jumps, stunts, and spins. It's a spectacular setting for a major international parkour and free running competition that dates back to 2007.
A lot of times when I come up with moves, it's literally I get into like a body position that I think is funny and then try to figure out how to flip out of that body position. And it's just a fun process.
Oftentimes when I'm creating a line or something, I'll just start off with like the first move and then I kind of like just play around from there until more things come into my brain, and then eventually it just feels like a full line.
We've been just jumping around, flipping around at a very young age. And since we're twins, we were doing the same thing. I was doing flips, he was doing flips. And I kind of went to YouTube, searched up parkour, and kind of went down the rabbit hole and just started watching all of these legendary videos and got very inspired. We're not actually super competitive with each other. A lot of times we're working together, and we each have separate kind of styles. So he does more flowy tricks, I do sometimes bigger tricks, and they kind of complement each other.
first thing you learn when you do parkour is typically how to shoulder roll, how to break fall, how to do things where if you mess up the thing you're trying to do, you can actually fall and still do it.